Good morning. I would like to share with you my art progress from the last day and a half. But first, let's look at a couple more comics from Free Comic Book Day. The next one I'm looking at is The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, what's interesting about this property, or I suppose inevitable about such a property, is that the best artists and best writers, in theory, should be helming this. So looking at this, one should get a good view of the quality of Marvel nowadays. I'm not actually going to say very much about this in terms of the art and the writing. I just wanted to point that out. But I'm not going to say much about that because I have not been following Spider-Man in the modern day. So I am not entirely sure how to critique it. One thing that I did notice in this new version is that it is very much dated in the present day, more so than previous versions of Spider-Man, at least from what I can tell. I may be mistaken, but this is definitely geared towards a certain demographic, a younger demographic. And as such, I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. I'm just going to show you some of the new design, maybe not new, but newer designs for this version of Spider-Man. From what I've been able to observe, I somehow think that older versions of Spider-Man made before I was born, the Stan Lee, Ditko, some of the earlier versions, that version of Spider-Man and Peter Parker seemed a bit more universal. The writing seemed capable of drawing in many different types of audiences of different ages, whereas this modern version is aimed more for kind of a tween audience, I suppose. But I shall not go into that too much. It may be possible that older types of writing were geared more for a general audience. Perhaps Ditko and Stan Lee just had more universal experiences in their lives and more widely read, or at least acquainted with the genre and able to universalize that. The last few pages of this comic give a summary of the recent run of Guardians of the Galaxy, and I must say it was incomprehensible to me since I am largely unfamiliar with this product. But this was not intended for me. And little baby versions of Spider-Man. The second comic, we're looking at Image Comics, which is always a very interesting company. It produces unique items, creator-owned items. I'm sure we're all familiar with the story behind Image. I am not going to really show too many images of this one. This is an excerpt from Barrier, evidently. This comic, and I don't really like the word comic. This graphic novel deals with some mature and complex subjects, so we're not really going to look at that in the video. I do want to point out two things. I do want to point out the orientation of the comic when we have a portrait view. This gives us a different a view of the world, a different view of the artwork, and I mean it is reminiscent of say a newspaper Sunday, at least some certain types of Sunday comics, some Flash Gordon comics at certain times, some of Hal Foster's stuff, perhaps. And so this does lend itself to a different type of storytelling. I'm reminded of the panoramic films from a couple of generations ago. And if I also want to point out interesting panel arrangements, which I really can't show here, and how that affects the flow of the story. But we can always talk about Image Comics later. So, in terms of my art progress, I have started penciling in the next 2/3 of this sketchbook. I've only inked in a couple of pages, and I'm just making some very general notes for the rest. Some of the penciling are just notes, and then some of it are a little bit more extensive. And my plan is to ink this. It's going to take a couple of weeks, and then I will paint it using watercolors, a little bit of acrylics and markers. And I intend for this to be my entry to the state fair. I also have this other sketchbook which I would like to finish. This is a monochrome sketchbook. It's an off-white color, and I'm going to use red ink on this and finish this short story. Now, I do have to wait a little bit because I am out of a very fine red pen. I think this page turned out fine without the finest, but I know in future pages I will need a little bit more detail. So that pen will come in the mail eventually, and I'm not really in a hurry anyway, but in case I need to take a break from my State Fair project, I can always work on this sketchbook. And of course, when these are done, I can move on to other things, such as the book that I got Sunday from Art Explosion. Alright, that's the update, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.